Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. Happy palette week day 6, assuming I'm posting these videos in the order that I originally planned. Maybe we're on a different day of palette week, but every single day for 7 days straight I'm posting some sort of palette themed content, and today's video is a little bit painful. I've literally sat with my palette collection for an embarrassing amount of time trying to pick the 10 palettes that I'm going to talk about in today's video. And the whole idea behind today's video is, if my house was burning to the ground and I only had time to grab 10 eyeshadow palettes, and these 10 eyeshadow palettes were the only palettes I was going to have in my collection going forward, like I couldn't go purchase any other palettes after this, like that kind of scenario, what 10 palettes would I choose? I believe I did this video like 2 or 3 years ago, and I think the original inspiration was from Samantha Ravndal. I will have everything in the description box, so if you're interested, check the description box. This was a struggle, and I really did take time. Like, it wasn't like I just like willy-nilly grabbed these. Like, I really did take time to try and pick these palettes out. Obviously this video is all in good fun, but if you are interested in the palettes that the 10 palettes I would grab if my house was burning to the ground, and these are the only 10 palettes I could keep, so essentially if I could only keep 10, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. Like I mentioned at the introduction, this was super difficult, and I wanted to make sure I had a good variety of like my favorite things in my collection. So we can start with the basic browns first. Obviously I knew I had to have, you know, my brown shadows to get me through day to day. I was super sad to not include the Natasha Denona Mini Nude within this palette grouping, but that palette only has 5 shades, and I was like, if I can only have like I need to choose things with a higher amount of shades. So at first, I absolutely would grab my Natasha Denona Gold palette. Not only is this a palette that you can't get anymore, but it is just an absolutely stunning palette, and within this palette I would have a lot of the browns that I am looking for, a lot of the matte browns that I'm looking for day to day. So within these 5 matte brown shades, I feel like in terms of like neutrals and warms, even really like kind of cools, I would have my bases covered. Plus on top of that, I have some really beautiful golds, some pops of blue, which I'm not doing all that frequently, but also this really beautiful green chunky textured shade that I love, another really beautiful green sort of lid topper shade. And I would just have a lot of things that I really love within this eyeshadow palette. Like truly, if this was one of the only eyeshadow palettes in my collection, I could get by. I could do looks that I was really happy with, loved. And I feel like this is a palette that even though it doesn't look like there's a ton of variety, I feel like this is a palette I wouldn't get bored of too quickly. So this would be my first selection. Then I grabbed the Glaminatrix Nearly Neutral palette. I do love me a really metallic, sparkly eye, so I wanted to make sure I had some of those in my now very small collection. So this is what this palette looks like. Again, within this palette too, there's a good mix of some matte shades that aren't necessarily repeats to the Natasha Denona Gold. Between Simplicity and Barely There, I feel like, again, I would have really quick, simple, neutral, everyday brown mattes, but then I have this really beautiful green. I also have these like pinky purpley sort of shades, or not pinky, yeah, purpley mauvey sort of shades, and then just a really good variety of some really, really beautiful sparkly metallic shades. So I knew that this was one that I would grab as well. I also have really been enjoying Glaminatrix. So, and then the last like neutral palette, I knew I needed some cool tones in my life. This is actually the palette that's on my eyes today. This is the Natasha Denona Glam palette, and this again, truly, if this was like one of my only palettes in my collection, I feel like day to day I could get by. Yes, I would miss having some fun pops of color in my life, but for every day, for work, even for going out, like you can really take this palette from day to night. It really has me covered in terms of my cool tone shades, and I also have quite a few really beautiful sparkly shimmers as well. This palette makes me happy. I'm always happy with the looks that I create with this palette. It's kind of like a no-brainer palette. Like you don't have to think too hard and you don't have to work too hard at blending, and it's just a palette that works. So this is definitely the next palette that I would grab in my 10 palettes I would grab. Okay. So then I knew I wanted like a pinky mauve palette, just because I knew there would be moments that I would, you know, want to do some mauve tone looks. It pained me not to grab my Rowan 1111 quad. It really did, but I had to let that go. I had to give it up. And the palette that I selected to kind of satisfy my mauve craving was the the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. This is just an absolutely stunning palette. And what I love about this palette is not only would it cover me in terms of pinks, purples, mauves for matte shades, there are really, really, really beautiful, unique textures and tones amongst the metallic shades as well. The shade Cosmic Love is so beautiful. I absolutely love Blissful. It's this like blue, purple, pinky, iridescent sort of shade. Like it's one of those just really beautiful, iridescent, shifty sort of shades that I think is beautiful. I also love the shade Moon Magic. And Energized is a really beautiful metallic, like satin taupey sort of shade. So I feel like this offers me a really good selection of shades that aren't aren't overlapping, aren't repeating in my neutral shades, cover my bases if I'm wanting a mauve toned look. This is a great wintry palette in my opinion, but then I also get some variety in the textures and tones amongst some of the shades, or yeah, eyeshadow shades within my collection as well. So Huda Rose Quartz is palette number 4. Okay, so next I was like, I know I love green eyeshadow so much, so I want to make sure I have a really good option for just like greens. Grungy greens, whatever it be, just green eyeshadow. So for that, I selected the Natasha Denona Yucca palette. And what I especially love about this palette is it covers me for like a neon chartreusey yellow inner corner pop, like a matte yellow chartreusey sort of shade. So I love that this palette offers me that, but then it offers me these really beautiful grungy shades. And also I also have like a matte teal blue, and then I have this cream to powder, like kind of evergreen sort of shade, and then, you know, a couple of more neutral browns that are probably somewhat similar to what I'm already keeping, but I do feel like this offers me enough variety and difference from the other palettes that I'm keeping. Plus I love this palette and I just think it's so stunning, so beautiful, and will give me everything that I would be needing in terms of green shades. I also have a couple of the Natasha Denona gold green shades, so between those two I feel like I would be covered in terms of my green eyeshadow looks that I would want to create. So then moving on to color, I don't do colorful looks all that frequently, but I would want the option. I would really want the option, and the two colorful palettes that I selected are actually from the same brand. So I have the Glamlight Ice Cream Dream palette right here. This is such a beautiful palette. You've got some really, really good punchy pastels, like almost like neon pastel shades, a good range of colors, and then you have, you know, a bunch of metallic shimmer shades as well. I absolutely love the Glamlight metallic formula. It's so punchy and just beautiful on the eyes. They also make really great nail polishes. So between this palette and the next palette that I have, I felt like I was really covered my bases in pretty much almost every color that I would really want. The only thing is like deepening, maybe I would struggle with a little bit, but even being able to just pair like some of these like shimmery colorful shades with like a neutral base, like a neutral base look, and then just pop a colorful shimmer on the lid. That's really how I mostly use color as well when I am incorporating color into my looks. So that is my palette number 6. Yes, palette number 7. I have the Glamlight Cake palette. I was going between the Glamlight Cake as well as the Kaleidos Club Nebula and the Kaleidos Escape Pod for my second colorful palette, but I really felt like this one gave me the most variety in that this is pretty much a rainbow palette. Like it pretty much has every single color of the rainbow. So I'm covered in terms of my rainbow matte shades. Do I think I would get a ton of use out of this? Probably not, but at least the option would be there. At least I would pretty much have every color that I need. And as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, there is one shade that I think I'm missing, and that is a black shade, but I think I'd be okay with that. Like I never reach for a black matte. I know that would be a helpful shade if I wanted to like deepen looks up, but I don't necessarily see that happening. And I'm sure I could find a dark brown to do it. But this is the 7th palette pick, and I feel like this would be, again, a great palette just to cover me in terms of any color that I would really be wanting to play with. Okay, so then the 3 palettes left are all like my special shades, palettes that are special to me from brands that I love that have really unique shadows, shifty shades, duochromes, things like that I can just have fun with. So picking an Odin's Eye palette was so difficult because Odin's Eye is one of my favorite brands. So I opened everything up, and the palette that I landed on that I feel like I would get the most use out of the most shades was the Merry Christmas palette. And there's so many beautiful shades that I love in this palette. I love the shades Snowman, Little Star, Jingle Bell, Elf Wish, New Year, even Bless, in terms of, and All Right for like a fun orangey coral. There's so many beautiful, fun, special shades within this palette. I wasn't really, like, I didn't really care about the matte shades as much. Like, I don't think I would really use poinsettia. I never reach for a red, but I do get use out of gingerbread and hot cocoa. Plus I have some more green matte shades within this, which just gives me, you know, more green variety, and I do love to play with greens. So I also struggled to not pick the ColourPop Muppets palette. That was also another one that I was thinking about, but it eventually got the chop. Can you tell I'm like sneaking in other palettes in this video? But ultimately I landed on this one for my Odin's Eye palette. It's such a beautiful one. There's such a good variety of shades too, between like blues, greens, reds, browns, oranges, pinks. It's a good variety. So this is palette number 8. Palette number 9, I don't think you guys are going to be surprised by this palette, but it's the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3. I was trying to decide whether or not I should pick the Volume 3 or the Volume 4. The Volume 4, I get more shades in it, but I'm more comfortable using the Lightwork Volume 3. I've gotten more use out of this shade. We have the shade Polaris, which is a really beautiful multi-chrome cream shade that when I'm wanting to play with my greens, this is such a good option. I know on camera it looks like more of like a golden shade, but in person it's like this lime green teal sort of shift. And I can layer these shades, as I mentioned many times before, layer these shades on top to create even more shades. I always like to do, like, let me show you guys. Okay, so I'm gonna swatch Martian, and I'm gonna put Martian right next to the shade Polaris, which is that cream shade, and then I'm going to take Martian again and I'm going to swatch Martian over top of Polaris. And do you see that I'm like, it is different? Yeah, it's different. You get like, you can get even more differences by layering these shades. So while the palette itself is only 8 shades, I can layer any of the other 7 shades in this palette over Polaris to create, let's see, 8 plus that 15, like 15 minimum. Plus I'm sure I could mix some of these shades to have fun with the multi-chromes as well. So this, for a special multi-chrome palette within my collection, is absolutely my choice for keeping. You guys know I love this palette and rave about it all the time. So that would be palette number 9. And then palette number 10, I knew I wanted to pick an Adept palette to keep. I thought about keeping the Minka palette, the one that's like more neutral, but it's like these really beautiful molten textured, really punchy, sparkly shades, very neutral though. And I decided against that because I kept the Glaminatrix nearly neutral, and I decided to go with the palette I can't pronounce, the Ninhadrin, because I felt like this one had shades that like would be unique to what I have already kept in my collection. I felt like this one was a better option than like the Plain Jane Remastered, because I like that some of the shades within this palette are a little bit deeper. This shade right here, AC I-20. I want to swatch that. It's this really, really beautiful like blue purple shade. Oh my goodness, how pretty is that? I have not yet used every single shade in this palette, but it just makes me happy to look at. I like that you have pink options, you have blue options, you have green options, you have purple options. There's so many different options. There's such a variety of shades within this palette. So this is my 10th and final palette in my grouping of palettes that I would keep if I could literally only keep 10 palettes in my collection. I would love to know, what did you think of my choices, and what palettes would you keep if your house was burning and you could only choose a few palettes to keep? Let a girl know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting my channel as you guys always do. If you have any other palette themed content you would like to see me film, let me know in the comments as well. And I will catch you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye.